Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar session. Today's session is going to cover some generic guidance on pension transfers, including the submission of pension transfers, so what is required, pre-approval, also just covering off where to find all of the guidance on the intrinsic extranet, also certain requirements for pension transfers, and just to give you a breakdown of all the available calculators as well and what they're going to be used for. So I hope that you can all see my screen clearly here. So just to start off then with regards to pension transfers, just to explain with regards to how you can transact pension transfer business. So basically you must first of all have completed two parts. So firstly you must attend an in-house pension transfer workshop, and this is then followed by a test on competent advisor. So that just demonstrates that you've got the correct knowledge and you're fully aware of the process, and once you've completed the test on competent advisor you're then able to advise on pension transfers for all clients going forward. Okay, so in terms of pension types that can be considered, you can only consider plans that operate on a purely money purchase basis. So these will be personal pensions and stakeholder pensions, retirement annuity contracts, money purchase occupational pensions, so where the protected tax-free cash has been fully established, executive pension plans, Section 32 plans where any protected tax-free cash has been established. So you cannot deal with any Section 32 plans that contain a GMP, which is a guaranteed minimum pension, unless you've got the required G60 or EF3 qualifications. So in terms of pension types that you may not consider, so you're not permitted, like I say, to advise on any schemes that have a defined benefit element unless you are fully qualified with G60 or EF3, or you are a fellow or associate of either the Faculty or Institute of Actuaries. So these plans, for example, would be defined benefit, so final salary schemes, deferred annuity contracts, Section 32 plans that contain any GMP, and pensions that have an underpin such as a reference scheme test. So plans like those type of plans basically have protected rights, so they might have some level of defined benefits. So that, again, that would be something that you would need to look into before you could advise on those. So just moving on then to the intrinsic extranet page, as you can see on my screen, in terms of the pension transfer guidance, all of the information that you need is actually on the financial planning site. So if you just go to AQ Guidance and Processes, and then if you just go along to Financial Planning Specialist, and as you can see you'll just scroll along to Pension Transfers from January 2014. So if you click on this, this will basically give you a full step-by-step guide as to what you need to complete and what is required for all pension transfer cases. Now, the FCA guidance are that all of our pension transfer cases through Intrinsic do need to be checked prior to submission. So they would need to go through the full pre-approval process. So just to show you basically the pre-approval process, as you can see on this front page here, you've got a link, and this will take you across to the pension transfer submission form. This does need to be completed. I know some people have previously sent emails over to pre-approvals. So basically, with regards to this, you would just complete the relevant information, which is your advisor number, the corresponding email address where you would like any correspondence to be returned back to you, the client's full name and postcode, and whether you're pre or post competent advisor status. So generally, if you're a new advisor and you've been advising less than 6 months, you may be pre-CAS. If you're an advisor who's been advising for quite a while, you would more than likely be post-CAS. You would know whether or not you would be considered pre or post-CAS. You would also need to clarify if the seeding schemes contain any guaranteed or protected benefits, as again this would go into a slightly different checking section. And with regards to the critical yield, so this is the percentage that you would gather from the critical yield calculator, which I'll show you in a few moments. Basically, you would then just complete the provider details, whether the fund is on the matrix, so that would indicate whether or not you've had to do any further research, so any whole of market research using de facto. You would also confirm your charges and confirm that the ATR profiler has been completed and whether or not the case has already been transferred in the last 5 years. You would then just submit that, and that will go across to pre-approval check-in for pension transfers, and the current turnaround time on that, depending on that specific type of case, would be between 7 to 10 working days. So just to make your clients aware, and obviously for yourself, that you are looking probably at a 2-week turnaround before the case could be submitted. So just going back to the pension transfers page, like I say, this is quite a useful document. So basically, you've got a full pension transfer guidance and procedures, and this is like an 18-page guidance, but it is really useful if you wanted to print this off. It gives you all of the information about what you can, with regards to advisor charging, what you can advise on and what you can't. So it is really useful for you to have a read through in your own time. And like I say, it just covers off various different wording as well, which may be useful for your letters. So just going back to the intrinsic extranet then for the pension transfer page. Now with regards to pension transfers, a full workbench submission is required. And just to give you a brief idea as to what is specifically required, if you just have a look on the financial planning sort of product, this is just like a product grid which tells you what requires pre-approval, whether a fact find is required. It just gives you a little bit more information. I hope you can see that okay there. Now you should have been given a copy of this on your workshops, so it's in the delegate handbook, and it just gives you a breakdown of all of the different product areas, whether or not the case requires pre-approval, whether or not the case requires a workbench fact find to be completed, what type of fact find you would be expected to complete, whether you would complete a manual suitability letter or a system-driven suitability letter through Report Writer, what illustration sources would be required, so whether or not it would be a direct quote from the provider or if it would be a research tool such as de facto, what application would be required, and a breakdown of the minimum documents that are required to be uploaded to Officeweb. So just moving along there, it also confirms about remuneration and how you would set that. So you've got a couple of options. Some cases require a manual sales process and some require remuneration just to be set in Officeweb following the workbench process, and any additional notes as well. So just to have a look at the pension transfers section, all pension transfers do require pre-approval, and all pension transfers require a full financial planning workbench fact find to be completed. Now in terms of the suitability report, I don't know if you've noticed, but you will not be able to use the financial planning suitability report purely because it doesn't at the moment link to the Officeweb system. So it will allow you to go into it on the workbench system. However, when you come to save it, it won't actually save across to Officeweb. So you can click into the financial planning suitability letter, but our guidance would be to just close that down straight away. And then if you do go back to the intrinsic extranet, as you can see, you've got the templates here for the suitability letters. So the main suitability letter template, so it's just in here, and basically you would just complete this. So all of the areas in red would just require some additional details. Like I say, this is a generic form, so you may find that a lot of it is not relevant, so you would just delete the areas that are not relevant, and then you would just put in all of the existing arrangements and the new recommendations confirm the client's attitude to risk. So like I say, if the client comes out as conservative, you would obviously delete all of the other attitude to risk descriptions. And then you would come down to my recommendations section, and then you would just replace all of the areas in red accordingly. And the areas in blue just give you a bit of a prompt as to what would be required. So for example, if you've recommended, say, a Aviva plan, because the product obviously has been sourced through Defaqto, you would then explain the reasons why that product is appropriate for the client, and it may be to do with the filters that you've used or the DNA score that you've gained from Defaqto. So again, you would just clarify all of the reasons for the transfer, any guarantees or benefits that are applicable, and again just the general benefits to the pension plan. If the client is making any regular contributions, this is where you would add all of those details. And again, you would just cover off all of the different areas that you would normally complete within the standard suitability letter. So once you've completed the suitability letter, as you can see, I know it looks like quite a lot of information there. I think there's about 12 pages. But like I say, a lot of it probably won't be suitable, so you might actually delete quite a bit of it out of the letter. You would just save that, so you would just go to File and Save. And then you could just save it, like I say, to your desktop. You could create a folder sort of for that particular client, or you could just save it. And then you would just save that to your desktop. And then that should come somewhere on here. Hopefully your desktop isn't as disorganized as mine. So as you can see, it's just on there. So when you come to upload that in Officeweb, you would just search for it on your desktop and then just upload. Okay, so I hope that's clarified about the suitability letter. Just going back then to the quick guide for the pre-approval section and for what is required for the pension transfers. So like I said, you would do the manual suitability letter, which you'll find on the intrinsic extranet page. In terms of the illustration source, you would obtain a quote directly from the provider. And in terms of the application, again, you would do this direct from the provider. So we would require both of those to be uploaded to Officeweb. Now, just moving along, with all pension transfer cases, we do require full fund research. Now again, depending on if you're restricted or if you're a whole of market advisor, if you're whole of market, Defaqto is the recommended tool for all research. However, you can use additional research as well as Defaqto if you've got other research tools that you're comfortable with or that you've used for quite a long time. So you may use TrustNet, for example. So you can use that as additional research. However, we would require as a minimum a Defaqto report to be included in the Officeweb system. With regards to restricted advisors, again, if you were to use a provider that is on the intrinsic panel, you would not be required to do any further fund research, as we would consider that we've already completed that through Intrinsic's guidelines. Now, you would always need to complete an attitude to risk profiler for the client. You would also need to upload a copy of the critical yield calculator, all illustrations that you have that are applicable to the case, the manual suitability report, and any additional supporting documentation. So for example, you may have a fee agreement in place with the client, so you would upload that if a fee agreement is relevant. You would also upload a copy of your SCDD. Basically just anything that you've provided to the client, you would upload onto Officeweb. Now, with regards to setting remuneration, you would set that in Officeweb, and that would just be followed on from the Workbench system. And again, any additional information that you need, you would find in the intrinsic extranet. So just going back to that, like I said, you've got some additional wording as well. So if plans work out cheaper than what their existing plan is, it actually gives you some extra wording here. that you can just copy and paste across to the suitability letter. So like I say, this just basically gives you some generic wording. I've compared the charging structure of the proposed new plan with your seeding plan, and the charges in my recommended plan are slightly lower than those that applied to your old plan. In effect, this would mean that the new fund performance could actually be lower by, and then you would put the critical yield in there, each year in the new plan, and still achieve the same results as your old plan at your selected retirement age. In reality, of course, I believe the fund growth prospects will be as good, if not better, in your new plan. So that's just an example there if the fund is actually going to work out cheaper. But you also have the other side of that, which is if the fund is going to work out slightly more expensive. And again, that would just gives you obviously a little bit more guidance on that. It's not as straightforward as just one paragraph. So if the fund that you're recommending is more expensive, I would definitely suggest using the pre-populated wording, because it just covers off all of the requirements that compliance have for those type of plans. Sorry about the sandwich van there, which I'm sure you can all hear. Okay, so just moving back to the intrinsic extranet, like I say, this page is a really useful page for you to gather all of the information that you need that's required for the pension transfer submission. So just to cover off, like I say, you've got a copy here of the maximum critical yield table. So like I say, because this is very specific to the case that you're looking at, I'm just going to give you just to show you an example of the maximum critical yield table here. So as you can see, the maximum critical yield that we would accept through intrinsic would be 1.2% or less, and that's dependent, like I say, on where the plan is coming from, so which seeding scheme, and what the new type of scheme is going to be. So if it's coming from a standard pension plan using a traditional pension fund, and it's going to a new platform using a clean fund that's diversified using wider asset classes, actively managed and rebalanced, you could charge the maximum critical yield for, which is 1.2%. However, for example, if you're just looking at a pension plan using a traditional pension fund, and it's going, say, to a platform but it's using a sector fund, the maximum you could charge there would be 0.2%. So this actually gives you full guidance just on the second page there. So if I just sort of scroll in a little bit there. So for example, we'll just look at what is the pension plan. So a personal pension plan or stakeholder where the costs of the plan and the underlying investments are typically connected, and any cost discounts are restricted to future pension contributions. So a package product uses own pension funds or mirror funds. So that's what they would class as a pension plan. It then follows on to tell you what it means to the client's pension, and then it just breaks down all of the other examples there. So you've got the clean fund rebalance. So if you do have any confusion as to which one would apply to your particular case, like I say, if you just match it up to these, and then if you just refer back to the maximum critical yield table, that will give you a guide as to what the maximum critical yield could be. So just going back to the extranet, if we then move on to the critical yield calculator, so you would do the calculator before you do that maximum critical yield table, just to refer back. The calculator is pretty self-explanatory. You will find that you'll get the odd case which will go completely wrong. If that's the case, just ring the advisor support team and we'll usually be able to figure out as the reason why it's either extremely high or extremely low. It could be sometimes something to do with the regular premiums. If the retirement date has changed, sometimes it is just a case that the the projected growth rate figures are just not in line with obviously what the system would look at. So again, we can give you some guidance on that, but every case is looked at on an individual basis, so it's difficult obviously to give you sort of an example. But the critical yield calculator itself is quite self-explanatory. So you would obviously put the fund value of the old pension in here, which is not obviously the transfer value. You would put the date of what the illustration was produced, which would probably be the day that you're putting this through. You would input the retirement date on the old illustration. So although you might be actually changing the retirement date, you would still put the old illustration retirement date in there. And again, the projected growth rate, so we would usually recommend that you use the middle growth rate. However, I know a lot of schemes do give different growth rates to what we would normally work on. Again, if you want some further clarity on that, do just ring the advisor support team and we can confirm what would be the best option for you to use there. You would put in here the figure that the provider has projected and input the transfer value here of the old pension. So fund value at the top, transfer value here, and what is the reduction in yield in the proposed new pension. So you would get this figure obviously from the new illustration, which should be titled "Putting it Another Way." This would have the effect of bringing growth of 7% down to 6.1% at your retirement date. So for example, and then you would put that in this section here. So this would then bring up a summary of the old pension, and then it would obviously bring up the critical yield calculation for the new pension, and this is the one that you need to be aware of. So like I say, if it's over 1.2, our maximum limit is 1.2, so you would need to really ring advisor support team and get some guidance on that. So any issues with the critical yield calculator, please ring us directly, because like I say, case by case, we look at those on a specific basis. Then moving on to the advisor charging. Now, with regards to advisor charging, all advisor initial charges are capped at a maximum of 5% for lump sum investments. However, where the charge is being taken from the client's pension fund, the advisor can operate obviously within a decency levels. So I'm just going to show you the various different advisor charging calculators that we use. Again, if you were to look at the pension transfer guidance, which I've just had up somewhere. So if you go to the pension transfer guidance, and if you just look at page 2, it's actually page 2 and 3. This just gives you sort of a general table as to what the recommended pension transfer decency guidelines are for advisor charging. So just to sort of go back to the calculator. Now, you're not required to upload a copy of this or anything. This is just for your own benefit, just to make sure that you're not sort of looking at a charge that's maybe too high or too low. So for example, for a new client or new investment funds, the impact of the charge on the critical yield calculator should not exceed 0.3%. Okay, so for example, so say we were to put in here, so this is for new money, lump sums. So this is when an existing transfer has already taken place, and the recommendation now is to move from a standalone product onto a platform solution in addition to consolidating other investments such as existing ISAs, bonds, unit trusts, etc. So if you look at the term of the policy, so the longer the term, the more that you're able to charge. For example, if we put in, say, 12 years, the decency calculator would recommend a maximum charge of 3.6% of the fund value. Now, if you're moving onto a platform, so when an existing transfer has already taken place and the recommendation is now to move from a standalone product to a platform solution, the maximum impact on the critical yield calculator for this would be 0.15%. So again, if we look at 12 years, that would be a maximum advisor charge of 1.8%. So as you can see, these all do sort of correlate with the guidance that I showed you earlier. So if we just go down to the example I've just given you there. So where a transfer has previously taken place, we looked at 12 years, so the maximum would be 1.8%. If they were doing a term of 25 years, for example, then the maximum would be 3.75. But if they were only looking at transferring it for 5 years, then obviously the maximum charge drops quite a lot. So just going back then, again, if you're moving it from platform to platform, the maximum impact that this can have on the critical yield is 0.1%. So again, if we looked at 12 years, that would be 1.2. Okay, so like I say, this calculator is just for your benefit. There's no recommendations that you have this included in the Officeweb submission. It's just for like I say, for you to work out for yourself. Okay, so in terms of objectives and how you would obviously explain this in detail on the submission, it is Intrinsic's view that all clients' retirement objectives must be reviewed in detail, and the client must be made aware of any shortfall that they may have in respect of their retirement needs. So as a result of a retirement objective review and the Workbench fact find, it may be that the client has existing pension provisions that can be reviewed to ascertain whether there is a more appropriate contract or plan that they can transfer to. So any case involving a pension switch or transfer must be conducted as part of the full review, and you couldn't treat it just solely in isolation, so you would need to do it on a full financial planning workbench. So just to give you an example, I'm not going to go through the workbench system with you today because we covered that off under the annuities process. With regards to the pension transfer workbench system, you would click on the At Retirement section and you would just take it through the full fact find as normal. But just to give you a quick example, when you come to the page, okay, so when you come to this page, in fact it's not this one. Right, so when you come to this page, I'll just make that a bit bigger. You would put in here the age that the client would like to retire at, which if we say 65, and their current annual income is 25 grand a year. So in today's terms, the client would like their annual retirement income to be £15,000, okay? So you may have had that discussion with the client. What you would do, you would put in there either a percentage of what they would like to receive, or you would put the monetary value. So usually when you're discussing it with clients, they'll give you a monetary value. So say you put 15,000 in here, you would then click on Calculate Shortfall, and then this would bring up the shortfall calculation. So the system will actually calculate the forecast based on the client's existing pension arrangements. Now, we don't know exactly what the calculation is based on, but the system itself is put in a lot of factors, including sort of projections for the future as to what we forecast the pension potentially to be. So if we say here that based on existing arrangements, the estimated annual pension would be 10,500. Obviously the client has specified that they'd like 15. So their shortfall is currently 4,500. Now if you take into account inflation, in tomorrow's terms, that means that they've got a shortfall of £9,439. So what it then tells you is how the client could contribute to increase their income in retirement and minimise the shortfall. So the contribution the client could consider to meet their shortfall is, in this case, £132 a month, which represents 6% of their current monthly income. or they could do a single one-off payment of $30,832 into the pension, which possibly could cover the shortfall. Now, these are just guides. Obviously, it depends entirely on inflation and how the fund performs, but it's just really to have a discussion with the client. So it doesn't impact your advice as such, but Intrinsic do require that you have a full discussion with regards to shortfall. Okay, now also another thing to cover off in the letter, I'll just get out this page. So you would need to cover off rationale obviously for the transfer. So you can only consider a transfer if there are clear reasons why the existing plan no longer meets the client's needs and objectives, and the recommendation to effect a transfer can be seen to be in the client's best interest. So as you can imagine, the FCA are very strict on obviously the reasons behind why the pension transfer has gone ahead. So it's important that full extensive research is completed and full justification is included on the suitability letter to the client. So again, some further guidance of this is held in the pension transfer process guide. If I just scroll down here, just under, so like I say, just breaks down the shortfall section there. So under rationale for transfer, it just gives you a bit of guidance and some wording that obviously you can put into your suitability letter. Now, with regards to gathering the existing policy information, it is important that you get sufficient information about every pension plan that you're looking to transfer. Also, if the client holds investments like ISAs, unit trusts, OICs, it would be important if you can gather as much information as possible on those as well, because that could also impact the recommendation. There's a large number of old and unusual plans, obviously, that are currently in place. So recommendations can only be made where the existing plan provider has provided sufficient details of these plans. So I know you do get quite a lot of difficulty sometimes trying to get the required information from the pension providers, but we do ask that you can gather as much as possible, because without sufficient information about the current plan, we wouldn't be able to allow the transfer to go through. And do also double check that any guaranteed elements to the plan or any defined benefits held within the scheme, because again, with old schemes, obviously there could be sort of hidden things in there. So you must receive the following information. So obviously details on the type of pension plan. It's not always that clear, so you just need to clarify that. A breakdown of the charging structure of the existing plan, and that includes the annual management charge. A type of fund and the fund name, so whether it's with profits or unit linked, for example. The value of the fund and the transfer value of the fund, taking into account any penalties. So if there is any sort of early transfer penalties, you would need to include those within the transfer value. Now, the projected value of the fund at the client's retirement date, assuming that all contributions were to cease. Now, this should be provided at assumed growth rates, currently 5%, 7% and 9%. We do not include any ongoing contributions, because obviously it would skew the figures if you were to include any regular premiums. If the provider cannot quote at 5%, 7% or 9% for any reason, and I know there is a lot that don't, so they might do say 4.5%, 6.5%, 8.5%. These projection rates can be accommodated, as the critical yield calculator we have has been developed to accept any assumed growth rate. So the only reason that we prefer 5, 7 and 9 is just that it's easier for comparison with most plans. But the critical yield calculator on our system means you can put any growth rate in there. Now, if it's a Section 32 or any other type of money purchase occupational scheme, we will require confirmation of the current tax-free cash entitlement. So with these policies, it could be more than 25% even after A-Day. Now, some actually look as though they're just at the 25%, but when you go into the plan a bit further, they've actually got a guarantee which is higher. So it's important that the seeding provider gives you all of the information regarding the tax-free cash amount, because they generally don't send you that, they just assume that you know it. If you deal with the Section 32, you may need to telephone the seeding provider directly and just get additional confirmation of this. We will not approve any transfers where the tax-free cash figure has not been explicitly confirmed by the seeding provider themselves. So if it's in excess of 25%, a calculation needs to be performed and the information detailed in the guarantees and benefits section as a minimum requirement. You must always establish whether a GMP element is present in the plan, if there's any guaranteed annuity rates, whether there's any protected rights, and whether there's any life cover or waiver of contribution benefits under the existing plan. The reason for that is obviously we don't want the client to lose any benefits that potentially they may see as valuable. So it's just to make sure you've covered it all off and the client's well aware of what they're going to actually lose when they do change to the new pension. Okay, so just having another look then at the Intrinsic Extranet site. If you are requiring information from a seeding scheme and you just need to get letter of authority, we have included a copy of this on the site. You may already have one set up in your own business, but if you just want to use a template, this is what we've put together. So we're happy for you to use that obviously for letter of authority requests. And like I say, you've just got a few more calculators here, so you can calculate sort of the retail price index, any tax-free cash calculations, the guaranteed annuity rate calculators, the growth required calculator, so obviously that's with regards to the new pension. So I think we've got an example in here already. So if the transfer value of the old pension, say we'll put in 25,000. And it was on, say, today's date, which is the 31st. Actually, we'll just leave it as it was. We'll start again, because and the retirement date, if we say right, okay, so I think that should have worked out right. Let's have a look. Probably shouldn't have changed the dates. Actually, I'm just going to start again and see if the other dates work better. If we just have a look at the example that's in here, because I don't know if it's just an issue with me having a training system, I might not be able to get any of the calculations to work correctly. If you put the transfer value in, so if we just look at this one, which is £693, I don't know why you would transfer a pension for £693, but and the illustration for this was September 2009. The retirement date on that was 2012, so it was only sort of 3 years on from that. The figure that's been guaranteed by the old provider was obviously slightly higher, which was 825, and the reduction in yield, so the figure in the new plan was 1.9%. So this is expecting that the growth per year would be 7.5%. So that's obviously what the growth is required at least to be 7.5%, just for comparison with the new plan. So your system should allow you to calculate that, no problem. I don't know if I've done something wrong there. So like I say, that's not a mandatory, it's just an additional calculator that you might find useful. Everything on here, like I say, is just for your own benefit and just might help you with discussions with the client. So once you've completed all of that, like I say, you would do the full workbench submission, all of your research, the attitude to risk profiler. You would then complete the manual suitability letter, which is just on this page here. You would then upload all of your documents to Officeweb. So you would upload the manual suitability letter, all of your research, the critical yield calculator, but other than that, you don't need to add any of the other calculators on as a mandatory, but you're more than welcome to do that if you would rather have those stored on the case. And then you would close the case, so you would basically press sort of create contract in the workbench system. You wouldn't close and create contract because we're obviously sending it for pre-approval. You would only close and create contract once the cases came back from pre-approval and it's all been checked and fine. And then you send it away for pre-approval, so like I say, you would complete the link in here. It would come back from pre-approval hopefully within 7 to 10 working days, and they'll email you back with the correspondence email that you've popped into the link. If there's any amendments or anything else that you need to add to the case, then they'll give you full details on that when they send you the email. Once you've completed everything that you need to do, you're then able to go back into Officeweb and set remuneration. So you would just set it sort of the same way that you would set for an ISA or an OIC. And then once remuneration is set, that is effectively the case submitted. And that's pretty much everything. So what we're going to do now is just move on to some questions. So if anybody has any questions, if you can pop those into the question box. And like I say, that is the full sort of guidance on the pension transfers completed for today. So thank you for that, everybody.